Hello everyone, Just Podcast TV is here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified on new contents.
Episode 97. Let's put our hands together. James returned to the rock by the stream. It was obvious he was excited. Girls, it looks like God has smiled upon us. I found a pretty good shelter. They were delighted by his high spirits. He had always been a calm, steady sort of guy, so with this level of excitement, they knew he must have found a really special place. As the last trace of day faded into evening, James led them to their new shelter. Their eyes widened with surprise when they came to the entrance. Wow, it's so big. How did you find it? Sure, it was not exactly a comfortable bedroom in a modern hotel, but it may as well have been. They were on a deserted island, after all. Vanessa leaned over and kissed James on the cheek. "I love you so much," she said, then ducked into the cave. Krista and Katie followed her in. James could tell that after the feast of wild strawberries, they had recovered a lot of strength. It meant that they could rest in their new home tonight without worrying about filling their stomachs. As the women explored inside and outside the cave, James stoked the fire he'd made just inside the entrance. They settled around it, happy for their good fortune. That night, James sat at the entrance of the cave. He held the AK-47 in his hands, keeping an eye on the dark forest in the near distance. The night was very quiet. The warm fire soon had him lost in deep memories. Thinking back to all the experiences they'd had, he felt as if they'd lived for several centuries. They had experienced so much. But although they had found a suitable place to live with a solid roof over their head and access to food and water, their future was still bleak. They were marooned on a remote island in the Indian Ocean with no immediate hope of rescue. On the other hand, despite the odds, they were alive, and they were gelling as a group. No matter what the future held, Vanessa, Katie, and Krista had decided to follow James, and he was determined to protect them. Seeing the three beautiful women become thinner by the day, their skin ravaged by the tropical sun, he felt a deep sense of blame. If it wasn't for him, they would still be in the United States, living the lives of privilege they once had. They wouldn't be sleeping in a cave on a deserted island inhabited by snakes, bears, and other creatures. Moreover, his parents were still in New York. Although he had arranged for his good friend Scott Parker to take care of them, with Elliot Klein as a backup, he was still worried about them. They had come from a small town in the Appalachian Mountains and were not used to living in a big city. He sighed in his heart. "They must be so worried about me," he thought. The night was unusually quiet. The burning branches in the fire made crackling sounds. He tried hard to encourage himself. "We are still alive, and we have the resources to continue living," he said softly. James firmly believed that as long as they could stay alive, they had a chance to leave this desolate island and return to modern society. He leaned against the stone wall of the cave, gun in hand, and kept watch the rest of the night. James woke everyone early. "Hey, time to get up. Get up and eat breakfast." He had wrapped bunches of wild strawberries and banana leaves. The women groaned as they sat up. They'd slept very soundly, wiped out from their journey yesterday. But because they had found the cave so late last night, they did not have time to cover the floor and plant leaves as a makeshift mattress. Thus, they had slept directly on the stone floor of the cave. As they stood up, they felt pain in their entire bodies. But they didn't complain. Instead, they looked with surprise at James and his deserted island version of breakfast sandwiches. "Wow," Vanessa said, "you've been busy." James just laughed. As the saying goes, early birds have bugs to eat, or something like that. He beckoned to Katie and Krista. "Come quick, before Vanessa eats your share." As everyone ate the simple but satisfying breakfast, James talked about the plans for the day. "We have a lot to do still. This cave is ideal because it is so close to the water source, so that solves a big problem. But still, our first priority should be to make it as comfortable and safe as possible. After that, we can get a better handle on the size and layout of the island, accumulate food, and think about how we can get out of here. Any thoughts?" He looked at Krista, Katie, and Vanessa in turn, waiting for their ideas and opinions. Although he'd become the de facto leader, he did not act arbitrarily. They were all capable and smart, and he truly wanted their input. The three women were silent. The atmosphere turned noticeably gloomy. It was not that James had said something wrong. It was because his words touched upon the most sensitive topic in each of their hearts. Vanessa spoke first. "James," she said, "do you think we will ever leave this place?" Her tone clearly did not have much confidence. Katie and Krista looked to him as well. They also wanted to know the answer to the question. James was put on the spot. He had no goal or solution for their rescue, but he understood that he could not display any negative emotions. "Yes," he finally said, "trust me, we will definitely leave this place." His words were firm, powerful, and full of confidence. Amplified by the natural amphitheater of the cave, they echoed dramatically in the women's ears. It fed their hearts with determination and ignited their will to live. Seeing the courage grow in their eyes, James reached out with his hand. "Come, let's put our hands together and vow as a team to work hard and leave this place." Sure, the personal empowerment gimmick was a little silly, but it actually had a purpose. It encouraged resilience and teamwork. And he knew they would need a lot of both to come out of this situation alive. Episode 98, Beds and Doors. After everyone had finished their breakfast, James arranged their mission for the morning. "The three of you go to the section of the stream just past the falls, gather some artemisias, and dry them on the rocks there. The more, the better." Yesterday, when he was studying the terrain by the stream, he had noticed a lot of artemisia shrubs. When they were picking wild strawberries, he had gone over to take a closer look. They'd be perfect for what he had in mind. "Why do we need those?" Vanessa asked curiously. James didn't answer. He just looked at her and smiled mysteriously. He handed the axe to Krista and said, "Lead them to the stream. Be careful." After that, he walked out of the cave and into the depths of the forest. Seeing him leave just like that, Vanessa pouted and said somewhat angrily to his back, "Thanks for nothing, jerk." Krista chuckled. "Let's go, Vanessa. If I'm not mistaken, he wants us to sleep more comfortably tonight." Vanessa was still confused. "Sleep more comfortably?" Krista explained. "We'll bring the artemisias back to the cave, dry them, and lay them on the ground as a bed. We'll be warmer and more comfortable that way." It finally dawned on Vanessa. "Oh," she said, "he thinks of everything." Krista walked out of the cave first, heading towards the luxuriant plants by the stream that James had mentioned. James carried the AK-47 slung over his shoulder. This time, his main goal was to find some sturdy vines. He also wanted to find wood suitable for a door. Last night, he decided to fashion a door for the cave entrance. If they had a door to keep out random critters, everyone could sleep in peace. He certainly needed a good night's rest. If this continued, his body's immune system would suffer and his risk of illness would increase. He could not get sick. It was that simple. In the tropical rainforest, rattan vines were easy to find. They were everywhere, but wood suitable for a door wasn't as readily available. James walked for quite a ways, but he still couldn't find any sturdy wood. He didn't want to go too far. If the women encountered any danger, he would not be able to make it back in time. Just as he was about to return to the cave defeated, a glade of towering trees appeared in front of him. More than 30 feet tall and about the diameter of a bowl, the trees were all perfectly straight. He happily ran into the grove. "Ha ha! The heavens provide once again," he shouted. These were the upper layer of trees in the tropical rainforest. The tallest specimens could reach more than 60 feet. They couldn't compare to the hardwood giants of North America, but they would certainly do. Fortunately, these trees were still relatively young. If they had grown a little more, he wouldn't have been able to deal with them alone. But now, looking at their manageable height, James estimated he would need about 10 of them to make a sturdy wooden door for the front of the cave. He wandered around the glade and chose the 10 trees he wanted, then headed back for the axe. He figured the ladies would have already finished cutting the artemisias and begun drying them. On his way back, James picked as many green vines as he could carry. He had no nails. The door would have to be tied up by vines alone. With a large bundle of vines on his back, James headed back to the cave. Suddenly, a small gray shadow jumped out of the bushes on his right. He instinctively threw the vine bundle off his back and raised the AK. He faced forward, the muzzle locked onto the threat. Through the rifle sights, James could clearly see the threat. It was a gray rabbit, now escaping at an extremely high speed. His passing must have spooked it. The animal sensed danger, so it ran away. James tracked the fleeing rabbit and pulled the trigger almost subconsciously. Because this was yet another gift from heaven, he could not bear to let it go. A bullet whistled through the air and drilled into the rabbit's back. There was a spray of fur and blood. The hair was sent flying several feet away by the force of the impact. It landed underneath a low bush and turned into a motionless corpse. James ran over and picked up his quarry. He wrapped it in wide leaves to prevent the smell of blood from spreading. Then he cleaned the blood on the ground with more leaves to disperse the smell. Only then did he carry the vines and their next meal back to the cave. As he walked, he was both excited and worried. He was excited because they would finally have meat to eat. They needed the protein. He was worried because, despite his efforts, the smell of the rabbit's blood might spread and attract carnivores to the area. When he reached the cave, James found the three women hiding by the large rock next to the stream. He saw that the smaller rocks nearby were covered with artemisias, drying in the sun. They looked at him anxiously. Krista was standing at the front of the rock with the axe in her hand. "What's wrong, sir?" she asked. "Was it another bear?" It was obvious that they had heard the gunshot. Since being in the forest, their sense of crisis awareness had been honed to a very high level. James was pleased with their reaction. No need to be nervous," he said. "I just killed a rabbit." He opened the leaves to display the carcass. "Tonight we will have another sumptuous dinner." The women took a look and relaxed. They were as excited as he was to be having meat for their next meal. First, James placed the vines in the stream to soak. After a while, they would become softer and easier to work with when it came time to build and mount the door. While they soaked, he found a spot a little farther down in the stream and washed the blood off the hare's lifeless body. When he was done, he left the rabbit with them, grabbed the axe, and headed straight for the grove of trees. The sky was still bright. His goal was to finish making the entire door before nightfall. With an axe, it would be easy for him to cut down the trees. He had done so many times back in Virginia. Around 1 in the afternoon, James had taken down the last of the 10 trees he'd identified. He quickly removed their limbs and cut them to the proper length to cover the opening of the cave. When he was done, he counted carefully. There were more than 40 lengths of wood. It was a big pile. He estimated that with his enhanced strength, he could carry around 5 logs at a time. It would be around 4 or 5 in the afternoon before he would be done transporting it all. If he worked overtime, he should be able to get it done. However, he would definitely be exhausted afterward. James placed the axe on the ground and started to move the wood. Episode 99. Feast. With his boosted strength, it wasn't too hard for James to carry 5 pieces of wood on his shoulder. Krista, Vanessa, and Katie were sitting in the cave chatting when he returned with the first load and dumped it on the ground. "What's all this for?" Katie asked. "I'm going to make a door for the cave," he said. "This way we can sleep more peacefully at night." He picked up a sample piece and compared it to the height of the cave entrance. It was cut just right. Each piece would fit snugly in the opening. As James started off to retrieve more wood, Vanessa asked, "Where are you going now?" "For more logs, of course," he replied. "There's still a lot more to go." Vanessa clapped her hands together happily. "Great, we'll help." James was taken aback. "Are you kidding me? These logs are heavy." Then Krista chimed in. "Sir, let's do it together." He had always thought she was the most sensible of the group, but now he wasn't so sure. She cut him off before he could protest more. "You said it yourself. We will work hard together and we will live together." With that, she waved her hand and said to the others, "Let's go. From this moment on, there is no distinction between men and women on the island. There are only people who want to continue living. Krista shouldered the gun and walked past James. Katie and Vanessa followed her like little girls tagging along with their cool older sister. James watched the women heading off into the woods, and his heart was once again filled with warmth for these amazing companions. He fell in behind them, deeply grateful for their help. With the 4 of them on the job, they moved the wood much faster. James still carried 5 at a time, while the 3 of them each carried 1 apiece. The rough-hewn logs ground into their shoulders, but they didn't complain. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they were done. James retrieved the soaked vines from the stream and began to fashion the door. First, he placed the wood on the ground in a cross shape. Then he used the vines like rope to affix the logs into a basic framework. Happy with the results, he lifted it off the ground and set it in the cave entrance. He then made the necessary adjustments until he was satisfied it would fit right. Next, he used the frame as an improvised ladder to climb to a stone shelf on the cliff just above the cave. The platform was pretty spacious at about 9 feet wide. It was overgrown with thick banyan trees and old vines. James used more of his prepared vines to hang the door about 2 inches from the ground. Once it was stabilized, he climbed back down and added the remaining wood to the frame, then fashioned a crude but effective lock so they could secure it from the inside at night. When the sun set, a brand new door was firmly hung at the entrance of the cave. James looked proudly at the results of his hard work. Although the door looked heavy, they could easily open and close it with just a gentle push. The opening at the bottom was too low for dangerous animals to squeeze through. They now had a perfect shelter, except for one more detail. "Ladies," James said, "go to the stream and bring back those dried artemisias. Let's make ourselves proper beds tonight. While you're doing that, I'll prepare our rabbit dinner." Greatly admiring his handiwork once again when he pulled open the door, James went into the cave and retrieved the rabbit. He took the axe and used it as a crude butchering knife to process the body for cooking. While he prepared dinner, the women busied themselves in the cave making plush piles of artemisias for each of their beds. That night, they had a bright fire blazing at the mouth of the cave. James pushed the skinned and cleaned rabbit onto a sharpened wooden stick and propped the stick on 2 stones on each side of the fire pit, so the rabbit was positioned right above a pile of glowing hot coals they'd pushed to the edge. The heat from the coals slowly roasted the rabbit. Soon it was sizzling with oil. The alluring smell of cooking meat was the most painful torture for people who hadn't had any protein for a long, long time. But James would not rush it. The meat was already a golden yellow, but he used a small stick to poke open the thicker part to check, then continued to roast the parts that had yet to cook through. With the tantalizing fragrance of the wild rabbit meat filling the cave, James finally moved the improvised spit away from the coals. By this time, they were all half crazed with hunger. He inspected his work. "The skin is nice and crisp. It's very tender inside. Just right," he said. He used the axe that he had already washed in the stream to cut off a leg. "Come, Vanessa, this is for you," he said. She did not stand on ceremony. She grabbed the fat rabbit leg and started to eat. He cut off the other leg and a generous portion of the flank and distributed it to Katie and Krista, respectively. Then he grabbed a hunk for himself and ate without caring about his image. When the greasy, tender rabbit meat entered his mouth, his taste buds exploded in ecstasy. The others felt the same way. It was the most delicious delicacy they had ever eaten in their lives. They divided the rest of the meat equitably and devoured it in record time. Soon only a pile of bones and residue was left, along with 4 people licking the oil from their fingers to get every last scrap. They all looked at each other and couldn't help but smile. It was an incredible feast. That night they snuggled against the fire and chatted happily. James used the axe to whittle a crude spear from an extra branch they had gathered earlier. Having another weapon around couldn't hurt. He felt deeply content. Now that he had completed the preliminary construction of their shelter, he knew he could carry out his next plan. The chatter died down as the night grew darker. As a group, they entered the cave and prepared to test their new beds. Suddenly, James snapped his attention toward the entrance. There was a heavy breathing coming from just outside the door. His entire body tensed up. He hurriedly motioned for the others to lean against the innermost wall of the cave. With his eyes, he indicated for them to pick up the axe and spear. With light footsteps, he slowly approached the wooden door that had been built only hours before. Episode 100. Tragedy narrowly averted. James quietly took up the AK-47 that had been leaning against the wall and approached the door step by careful step. Behind him, the women clutched their weapons, ready to fight. Krista with the axe, Vanessa the spear, and Katie with a large rock she'd found on the floor of the cave. When James was about 6 feet from the door, he stopped. He instinctively felt he needed to maintain a certain distance just in case. He thought of the bear and wasn't sure if the door was sturdy enough to withstand a determined assault. He could clearly hear the breathing now. Whatever it was out there sounded large. He quietly chambered around into the rifle. He did not move, nor did the unknown creature outside. James quickly eliminated the possibility that it was a human. If it were, they would not expose themselves so easily by breathing so loudly. They would be more careful to conceal their presence. He could now tell that their visitor was a large carnivore of some sort. He could hear the guttural rumbles of the beast mixed in with its breathing. He figured it had been attracted by the rabbit's internal organs from the gutting process. He had deliberately thrown them far downstream, but apparently it was not far enough. The animal must have followed the smell right to the cave. Cursed himself for being so careless. The creature suddenly pounced on the door and let out a frightening roar. The startling noise instantly broke the silence of the forest night. It flushed a large group of birds, which fluttered noisily away from a tree outside the cave. The beast's front claws pressed against the door and shook it. Thankfully, the lock held. James was shocked by the ferocity of this sudden attack. He took 2 big steps back. "Leopard," he said. "It's a leopard." He could identify the big cat from its deep roar. At the same time, he could clearly see its sharp claws sticking through the slats of the door. When it couldn't break through the door with its claws, it immediately retreated. But like the bear they'd faced the other day, the leopard was an apex predator on this island. Undeterred, it pounced again. The 3 women huddled at the rear of the cave were terrified. James, however, became unusually calm. He knelt down, took a shooting position with the AK, and aimed the muzzle steadily at the cave entrance. He unlatched the safety and put slight pressure on the trigger, ready to pull it at any time. The leopard kept attacking the wooden door, but it moved too quickly for James to get a guaranteed shot. He waited. There were only 22 bullets left. He couldn't waste a single one. Then, things suddenly became still outside. James waited a few minutes more, then quietly approached the cave entrance. He looked through the small gaps in the door. With his powerful eyesight, he could finally confirm that the leopard had retreated. The crisis was over. The wooden door had completely withstood the test. It served its purpose as a protective barrier during the night. James went back to the 3 frightened women and simply said, "It's gone." After that, he placed the gun in a convenient spot in case he needed to grab it again. Then he lay down on the bed made of dried plant leaves and prepared to go to sleep. The women looked at each other. They were still very shook up by the ordeal. They walked over and squeezed next to him. Compared to the hard stone slab last night, the dried artemisias made for a soft and comfortable bed. The ladies, however, kept tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep, their nerves on edge. James felt perfectly safe. He now knew the door could withstand an attack, and he would be woken if another beast tried. He would have plenty of time to react. Fresh, dry artemisias gave off a unique, almost medicinal fragrance that had an oddly hypnotic effect. Not long after, James fell into a deep and sweet sleep. He slept closest to the cave entrance. Vanessa lay in the innermost part of the cave. Katie was next to her, and Krista next to James. The women were still very uneasy, but as the adrenaline wore off, one by one they fell asleep. James was awoken not by a violent attack, but by a soft embrace. In the middle of the night, Krista had quietly turned towards him and hugged him tightly from behind. Apparently worried James might get cold, she'd even boldly opened up her shirt to provide skin-on-skin warmth. Pressed to James' back, her naked breasts were soft and full. His entire body heated up and his blood surged. But there was nothing he could do other than distract himself with mundane thoughts and try to fall back asleep. When it was almost dawn, someone got up. Worried she would wake the others, whoever it was walked carefully on her bare feet. James, still in a light sleep, instantly figured out it was Vanessa based on her footfall alone. Due to the danger outside the cave, though, she did not dare to go outside. Instead, she could only squat at the cave entrance and pee. The warm urine hit the hard stone. On this unusually quiet night, in the recess of the cave, the sound was especially clear. Vanessa probably didn't think that her pee would make such a loud sound. She immediately stopped, apparently embarrassed. In the end, she deliberately controlled the stream a few times before she finally ended her shy urination. She carefully returned to the bed and went back to sleep. Not long after, the sky gradually brightened outside the cave. James stretched lazily. He got up, walked towards the cave entrance, and looked outside through one of the gaps between the door slats. The morning light outside was hazy. A faint orange glow appeared in the eastern sky. Their 5th day after landing on the island officially began. Irritants that permeated the air of modern industrial society. Immersed in this natural oxygen bar, he felt energized. Today is a good day. Everything I want to do can be done. He walked downstream to pick wild strawberries, humming a song the entire way. Before long, he returned to the cave with a pile of ripe fruit for their breakfast. "Hey girls," he shouted, "it's time to get up. It's going to be a beautiful day. We can't waste time." Vanessa, Katie, and Krista slowly roused and sat up. Krista, who had opened her shirt to warm James the night before, suddenly realized that her breasts were still exposed. She hurriedly covered her chest with her hands, then quickly buttoned her shirt. When she looked up, her face was red as the strawberries in James's hands. She was already embarrassed enough, but that didn't stop Vanessa from probing. "Krista, honey, did you sleep with James last night?" She leered as she asked the question, making obscene gestures with her hands. Katie scrutinized Krista and James with a strange expression. The atmosphere in the cave became awkward, for James anyway. Krista opened her mouth to say something, then went quiet. She was like a thief who'd been caught in the act even though there hadn't been any act. Still, she felt a little guilty in her heart and was obviously extremely embarrassed. James was surprised that Krista, this aloof big sister of the group, had such a shy side. Wanting to move past the awkwardness of the moment, he tried to change the subject. "Vanessa, enough with the jokes. I've picked a bunch of strawberries for breakfast. Come, eat." They gathered around and began to share the fresh strawberries. But the matter wouldn't go away. Katie looked at Krista and gave her a wicked smile. "Hey," she said, "these things happen sometimes. You don't have to be embarrassed." James almost spat out the strawberry in his mouth. "That's right," Vanessa added with a big grin. "It's not a big deal. We are sisters who live and die together now. There's nothing we cannot share, right?" James coughed, dislodging the chunk of berry he'd almost choked on. What the hell was going on? Weren't Katie and Vanessa the most jealous of the group? Now here they were being so magnanimous. But Krista was innocent, and she said so. "It's not like that. Nothing happened between us last night." James was terrified this conversation would turn into a train wreck. He interrupted again. Okay, enough about this. Nothing like that happened last night. Now hurry up and finish breakfast. You have a lot of things to do today." Secretly, James was pleased by this turn of events. Katie and Vanessa's surprising attitude that it was okay for the three of them to share him was actually wonderful news. He couldn't believe they would be so generous in such a matter. After breakfast, the women went to the creek to wash up while James got busy. First thing on the agenda, ventilation in the cave. They'd only spent 2 nights there, but already the space wasn't smelling so good. It was a mixture of smoke, body odor, and urine. His plan was to make a chimney out of banana leaves to expel the smoke from the cave. Banana leaves were easy to find in a tropical forest, and soon he had enough for his purposes. The next step was to weave vines into a long cylinder. This was the framework of the chimney. Then he lined the cylinder with the leaves. The entire project took him only about an hour or so. Just as James was about to install the chimney through a hole he'd cut through the top of the door, the ladies returned from the stream. "What's that?" Vanessa asked. "It's a rudimentary chimney," he explained while making adjustments to his work. "It will expel the smoke from our fire and keep the air in the cave fresher." When he turned around, his eyes lit up. Freshly bathed and dressed, the 3 women had returned to their peak beauty. Even without cosmetics or fancy clothes, each one of them looked radiant. They didn't seem to notice his attention to their appearance. "Oh," was all Vanessa said, and the 3 of them promptly got to work helping him. They soon had the primitive chimney installed. James did not remain idle. He used essentially the same method to construct a simple toilet out of a smaller cylinder. He placed it in a far corner of the cave and lined the bottom with ashes from the campfire. Now they could go to the bathroom at night with a modicum of privacy and without having to leave the safety of the cave. After completing the toilet project, James stood back with an appreciative gaze. He felt that this place was becoming more and more like a home. It was only 10 in the morning, but the lunch bell in his belly reminded him that he should begin preparing their next meal. Yesterday, he was lucky enough to get a rabbit. What was he going to do today to top that? With phenomenal timing, Vanessa suddenly ran over to him. "Fish!" she said excitedly. Katie was right behind her. "Yes, there are fish in the pool under the falls. Quite a lot, too." Krista walked up next. "But how are we going to catch them?" she asked. James let out a delighted laugh. "It looks like the heavens have been good to us once again. I was just thinking about what we were going to do for our lunch today." With a wave of his hand, he led the 3 beautiful women back to the pool under the waterfall. "Come, let's go catch us some fish."